Welcome everyone. Has anyone been to Port Arthur before?
No.
Oh, one at the back there. How long ago?
I've been 3 times now, but 6 months here.
Oh, okay. All right.
Wow.
Keen fan of Port Arthur and convicts, maybe.
Reserves.
Fair enough. Well, look. What do the rest of you guys know about convicts and the way they were treated here? Do you think they were treated nicely? They get spas and massages every night and that sort of thing?
Probably.
No. Sorry.
Probably.
Probably, yeah. Look, I like that version actually. I'd rather tell that version. But unfortunately I can't. The version I'm going to tell you about is where men who served time here, and some people even worked here during that era, called this place Hell on Earth. So it definitely wasn't a very nice glowing recommendation for the place. Here they whipped convicts for the first 20 years, anything up to 100 lashes at a time with the cat o' nine tails whip. They made them work in chain gangs, wearing shackles up to 27 kilos in weight, chopping down big huge trees, carrying them kilometres through the forest on their shoulders, breaking rocks, working in freezing cold waters at the shipyards around the corner from where you get the boat today, the old dockyards. And if that wasn't enough for these convicts, halfway through the life of this prison, they introduced a whole new sort of prison called a separate or silent prison, where convicts were kept separated from each other in silence, and if they were really bad, in darkness as well. So not a very nice place indeed. However, if you compare this to where these men came from in England, this place is an improvement, believe it or not. There's this place is about punishment, sure. I mean, the British are very good at punishment and discipline in those days, but it is also about reform, and that's the big difference here at Port Arthur. In England, where these men came from, they could have just been hung by the neck until they're dead for things we might have considered to be misdemeanours. Or they'd all be thrown into one big jail cell together, and that's the men, the women and children alike. So if you're a child of, say, 5 years of age from the working classes, you would be expected to go to work. Maybe as a chimney sweep, maybe in the coal mines, or maybe in the factories. If you didn't want to do that and you turned to the streets to survive and you actually stole things or got into trouble, you would go to court at the age of 7. And there's no children's courts in those days, of course, just one court for everyone, and you'd be thrown into the same jail cells as well as the adults. So not a very happy life for them. And if you're 9 years of age, you can be transported one way only to lovely Van Diemen's Land, to Tasmania. Probably not so lovely back then. So, yes, it's a harsh old system. But this system, it's about reform as well. Prison reformer of that era, a man by the name of Jeremy Bentham, who described the Port Arthur and similar places as being like a great big mill or a machine. The purpose of this mill or machine is to grind these rogues, these convicts, back into honest men. Now, I guess that's an industrial revolution way of saying it's a reform system. But if we use that analogy, how does it work? Well, 4 cogs drive this reform system, 4 basic things. First one, discipline and punishment. As I said before, no surprise, it's a prison. Second one, separation and classification. So instead of throwing you all into one big jail cell, now I'm going to separate you out. The men from the women, the adults from the children, the hardened convicts and ones who just want to serve their time and get back home. Third cog, and this is where reform kicks in, trade, training and education. So, from this big hedge all the way back around here, once upon a time, this was like a little mini industrial town in England. They taught these convicts around about 40 odd different trades. Everything from shipbuilding around the corner there, to coal mining on the other side of the peninsula. And in between, you had sawmilling, you had shoemakers, you had brickmakers, bricklayers, quarriers, timber getters, bell makers, coopers, blacksmiths, you name it. Anything they could pretty much do with their hands in those days. What they used to call mechanical trades. Now, there were 3 reasons for this. First one, obviously it's a reform tool for the convict. Give him a trade, gets out of jail, hopefully starts a whole new life for himself, contributes to society and never comes back. It's a nice idea anyway. Second one, for the British, this is all about nation building. They want this colony built up as quick as they can. You know, they've got the Dutch and the Portuguese in the Pacific area with the East Indies. They've got the French who think Tasmania is not a bad place to settle either. So they need this place built up with as much infrastructure as they can, as quickly as they can. And also the third reason, well, a very simple reason, is that they make a lot of money here. This is a very profitable place. Has to be, because this place, they have to clothe and house and feed these guys, even have to look after their health. As a matter of fact, up on the hill there, that big building, that's the remains of the old convict hospital here. It could house 80 to 90 men. Now, the British convict has some basic rights under the law and the British law. I emphasise the word basic. One of those is basic medical attention when they are ill or injured. So, hospital just for the convicts, get them back on their feet, back to work again, making more goods. How productive were these men? First 5 years here, they cut and sawed 900,000 lineal metres of timber. They could make 180 ships in 14 years while those dockyards operated. 250 pairs of shoes and boots of a good quality, apparently, a week, and over 600,000 bricks a year here, all made by hand, plus whatever else they turned out as well. So, basically, very productive men. Don't know if they always wanted to be very productive, but basically that was part of their reform process. Last cog in that machine, religious and moral education. Up there behind those trees behind you there is the remains of a lovely old stone convict church. It would house 1,100 odd people at a sitting. One of the first major buildings built here at Port Arthur. Religion and moral education played a big part in the reform process for these convicts. Every Sunday they're marched up there under guard by the soldiers, probably at gunpoint half the time, to hear the sermon. No choice for them, they have to go to church. And of course another basic right they have under British law, choice of freedom of religion. So that church is an unconsecrated church. That means they don't have to build one for the Protestants or one for the Catholics, just build one great big one, don't give it a name, don't consecrate it, and everyone can go to services there. Now on a Sunday what would happen is this, all those houses up in the hill there, they were government issue houses for the doctors, the ministers of religion, the accountants. They'd march their families up the church, they'd sit on one side of the church, they'd drop a big canvas curtain down the middle, then in would be marched all those convicts on the other side of that canvas curtain to hear the sermon. So, nice idea, isn't it? Anyway, 1830, a ship sails in here, and there's 46 men aboard that ship that are going to be left here. The first white settlers here. There is a young naval lieutenant by the name of Lieutenant John Russell. He will be the first commandant. There are 15 soldiers to help him and 30 convicts. And they don't come here to build a jail. Their purpose initially is to cut timber. What sort of timber? Timber like those big blue gums over there. Now those ones are 170 years old, planted by one of the commandants in the 1840s. So they're pretty decent size for that age. Probably planted by some convicts working for him, of course. However, the trees they came to cut, virgin forest back then, kilometres and kilometres of it through the hills here behind us. Some of these blue gums back in those days were apparently 80 to 100 metres tall. They were huge. Now they're the tallest flowering tree in the world. A very tall, straight grain timber, very valuable. In those days, British Navy, built out of timber obviously, the strength of the empire. Therefore it's almost like a defence industry they come here to do. Built a hut for the convicts over there on those grassy slopes, long gone now of course. Built a hut for the commandant and a hut for the soldiers, and off to work they go. Within 3 years the population's gone from 46 to over 600. Why? Well, the government of the day had 2 previous punishment stations to here. One out at Sarah Island out on the west coast near Strahan. You go out that way, you'll probably do a trip out to Sarah Island, and one up to Maria Island on the east coast. But they decided to move everyone here and make this the major secondary punishment station. So, what do I mean by secondary punishment? Well, the convicts that came here were men only, and they were secondary offenders. That meant if you were transported to Tasmania and you never offended again, you wouldn't come here. But if you did re-offend, quite possibly this is where you would be sent to. So this prison was for the worst of the worst. So by 1840, 10 years after coming here, the number of secondary offenders here, and civilians and soldiers who guarded them, etc., around about 2,500. Makes this place the 3rd biggest town in Tasmania, behind Hobart and Launceston. Not the sort of town you want to visit, of course. Has a jail, has a little industrial town, has a shipyards, has a coal mines, but it has a lot of people here as well. And that doesn't include another couple of thousand at various workstations around the peninsula. So it's a hectic place. Now we're going to go for a water. So this would be their main base, but they would go elsewhere, basically negotiate with other Aboriginal clans to, cross their land and whatever sort of thing. So, yeah. But yeah, by the time they put that guard line in, anyone that was left, and there probably wouldn't have been very many, basically couldn't get back anyway. Alright, these photos are from about 1859, 1860. Gives you an idea what this place was like. So where we were was just there on the waterfront. And you'll see it used to have jetties and docks all around it. They all got washed away about 2 years after the prison settlement closed. By the late mid-1870s, those docks weren't used as much as they were obviously in the early convict days, so they were starting to fall in disrepair. Big storm surge came through, basically took them out. You have to remember that oval we just walked across is all reclaimed land. Now, when the convicts first came here, we would have been walking in knee-deep water. They decided to infill it back in the 1840s and 50s to gather more land, etc. All that infilling was done with big, huge logs. Then they were filled in between with dolerite boulders and then clay as well. So what you're walking across is reclaimed land there. On the corner there was a building called the commissariat store. That was where everything coming into the site basically was stored, or anything coming out of the site was stored. Obviously a fairly well guarded area. And there was a big crane in front of that. And that crane used to sit in that stone column that's still out there in the water. That's pretty much all that's left of the old dockyards. Up behind it's the guard tower that still exists today. And behind that, on the top of the hill, big set of military barracks once upon a time, sandstone and brick, housed up to 250 odd soldiers here. The British were always rather worried about rebellion and uprising, having so many convicts in one spot, and also having had so much problems elsewhere in the world, with in the Americas and in New Zealand and in India and places like that. So they're always cautious, always had a regiment here right until about 1863. They got torn down after the convict settlement closed, and I'll tell you a bit more about that at the end. Then you've got the penitentiary, etc., and the hospital up behind it. This one is looking back from that direction towards us now, and once again you can see all the workshops there that were in front of the penitentiary. You get an idea of the size of the semaphore towers as well. And coming down here is a building that's still partially just today on the right hand side. That is the old paupers mess hall, and in front of it, big set of barracks for the paupers, and I'll tell you who they were at the end as well. You also start to see that by the 1850s and 60s they had developed a fairly good orchard and farming system, but when the early years they came in, couldn't grow much at all. Had to do a lot of fertilising with the soil using night soil, which is convict poo, quicklime, seaweed, etc. And the other two, they're the big old stone church, back when it had a roof and a steeple. So back in the convict days, obviously, pretty significant building for that period. Alright, we're going to go